Welkom bij deze webinar van DAPA, ISPConnect en Veeam. Ik ben Simon Besteman, ik ben de directeur van ISPConnect en ik heet jullie hartelijk welkom, ook namens mijn collega Ruud Allarts van DAPA, die met vakantie is. We gaan het hebben over data management in de cloud met de experts van Veeam. We hebben als gasten de Vice President EMEA Cloud van Veeam, Graham Critch, en de Senior Global Technologist, Michael Cade. En dat betekent dat we ook echt serieuze technische bekwaamheid hebben in deze webinar. En dat ik jullie ook wil uitnodigen om niet te schromen om vragen te stellen, ook moeilijke, lastige vragen, want die kunnen vandaag gewoon beantwoord worden. We gaan de hele webinar opnemen, dus ook voor de mensen die zo direct nog inloggen, wordt het gewoon mogelijk om alles thuis nog eens een keertje te zien. We zullen de video delen met iedereen. We zullen ook de slides delen die we nu gaan presenteren. Dus dat betekent, jullie hoeven ook geen aantekeningen te maken. Je krijgt straks alles zelf thuis. Ik wil graag het woord geven aan Bert van Meel van Veeam. Bert gaat dan overschakelen naar het Engels om Graham en Michael te introduceren. Bert, ik geef jou heel graag het woord.
Ja, dankjewel Simon. Welkom ook namens Veeam bij deze virtuele roundtable. En bedankt dat jullie de tijd ook nemen om hierbij aanwezig te zijn of wel het later terug te horen. Zoals Simon al zei, de sessie wordt dus opgenomen. Zoals bij een echte live roundtable is interactie meer dan welkom. Dus inderdaad, schroom niet om je hand op te steken of om de vragen te plaatsen in de chat. Of inderdaad, als je je hand opsteekt, dan kunnen we de microfoon even openzetten. Zoals gezegd, mijn naam is Bert van Meel. Ik ben bij Veeam verantwoordelijk voor de service providers. En ik help ook de service providers met hun go-to-market vanuit ons portfolio. Vandaag laat ik het woord graag aan anderen. We gaan het hebben over de kansen en misschien zelfs bedreigingen die de veranderende markt met zich meebrengt. En we doen dit op basis van het meest recente onderzoek wat wij hebben gedaan. Het Cloud Data Management Report. Daarvan krijgen jullie na afloop ook een exemplaar toegestuurd. Zoals gezegd, hiervoor hebben we 2 specialisten bij Veeam in de call erbij gehaald vandaag. En die zijn beide Engelstalig. So this is the time to switch to English. And first of all, I'd like to introduce Graham Critch. He has been in the cloud market already before the word cloud was invented. Not only as a vendor, but also as a service provider himself. And within Veeam, he is responsible for our service provider program in EMEA. So welcome, Graham. And
thank you,
also on the call, we have Michael Cade. I'm pleased to say, and Michael is in his global role, is part of our strategy team and has been with Veeam for over 5 years now, but in the market for much, much longer. So also welcome, Michael. And I would conclude my introductions here, and I will gladly hand over to Graham and Michael to take it away.
Okay, thank you, Bert. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good, just thought I'd check. So thank you to people for joining. We've got a few starting to dial in now. When we were asked to do this, it was the idea was it to be more of a discussion rather than just straight slideware, although going through the report and extracting out the highlights, we have ended up with a few slides, but you know, Michael and I would prefer this to be as interactive as possible. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment at any time, please use the chat or the Q&A boxes, and we can you know, or put your hand up as a participant and we can unmute you to ask the question. Just making sure I've got the chat open as well. So I've got that going. So yeah, we'll kick off. So this was, there we go, presented to us as an agenda, but we changed this to discussion points. So what we've done is to go through the Cloud Data Management report that we completed earlier this year, and then look at the data that it projected and look at how that is going to affect cloud provider partners moving forward. So a little bit of background on the report itself. It was, we went to over 1,500 companies globally. And I think it's very important to state here that this is not all Veeam customers. So we didn't just go to our own customer base. We opened this up to all enterprises and mid-tier companies, regardless of what product they were using. So we got the right sort of feedback. It covers all market segments, but there was a very strong EMEA influence. So I think well over half of the respondents to the survey were from EMEA, and very strong responses in EMEA from the Netherlands, from the Nordics, from Germany, France, and the UK. So a good representation of views in the marketplace. And then the most important point, this was actually carried out before the COVID epidemic hit. So I think, you know, you can draw your own conclusions with this, but some of mine from looking at these results is there's some very encouraging things for service providers in this report, but they've been certainly amplified by the COVID outbreak. And I'm sure quite a few of you have seen this quote from the Microsoft CEO, that we've actually seen 2 years worth of digital transformation in just 2 months. And I was on another cloud industry forum webinar yesterday, and they were talking about things like the rollout of new technologies and how pre-COVID, you know, rolling out something like Teams would have been a huge project that would have maybe taken 6 months to a year, with a lot of people involved, project managers, you know, training, user enablement. And actually what happened is that Teams was pretty much switched on overnight in a lot of large organizations, and people just started using it without the training and without the sort of significant project. So I think, you know, we've seen that cloud technology and collaboration tools in particular that are fairly intuitive can be rolled out very quickly. Now, obviously, I think they would have liked to have planned the project a little more in advance, but didn't have the time. But that's just typical of the change of the way we've started to operate. I've also put a few observations of my own up here of what I've seen over the last couple of months. And Michael, please feel free to add to these. When I've spoken to service providers, pretty much most of them seem to be in a fairly good place at the moment. The customers that they have don't tend to be in one particular customer segment that's been hit hard. And so they've had a more balanced revenue stream since then. The remote working projects that have come on have given them a big boost to sales, so an increase in the number of VPN connections that people required, but also the infrastructure required for remote desktops. So that's seen an uptick in business. They have seen some attrition already, particular from customers that were in the travel or hospitality sectors. They've taken advantage of the pay-as-you-go contracts they've been under to scale back operations, you know, waiting for their business to come back online. But I think most people agree that they're quite optimistic about the future, but they do believe that the only true picture they'll get of the future is when the various government support programs around Europe start to be switched off. You know, UK, that's going to be in October time. It's earlier in some other European countries. And when that finally does happen, then we'll have a good picture of what businesses are left in the market and what state they're in. Anything you wanted to add on that one, Michael? Anything you've seen in particular?
Yeah, I think obviously to echo what you said, Graham, but also like exactly to go on to like, so in the UK in particular, we've got the furlough scheme. I know there's various other programs across Europe as well. I think that drives the thought process of, well, how from a technology point of view do we consolidate not only what we're doing from a data point of view or what our customers are doing from a data point of view, but also how does our IT team that maybe was once 20 people, now we've probably got 5 or hopefully 10. How do we achieve more based on the technology that we have? It's been very easy with 20 people to achieve everything that we do. Now we probably need to look outside of what we already know around. Let's look at automation. Let's look at orchestration to drive the business to just achieve what we want. I think prior to all of this, we were always talking about automation, orchestration around, or how can we make things easier, faster, better. Now we're probably having to look a little bit more closely out of necessity, because we potentially won't have the same workforce numbers, which is quite damning and quite scary overall. But yeah, I think that's definitely what I'm hearing.
Okay, great. All right, so let's move on and look at some of the report then in a little more detail. And as I say, I've extracted a few slides from it. So this is one of a couple of no surprise slides. I was going to use another term, but no surprise slides. But this is looking at now and 2 years out, and looking at the change in physical servers, virtual machines, and cloud-hosted VMs. And I think one of the most interesting things here is people don't see that on-premise environment going away. You know, the number of virtual machines is going to stay relatively constant over the next couple of years. And no surprise, the growth is in cloud and cloud-hosted VMs. So you can see that there's going to be, there's predicted 30% rise in the number of cloud-hosted VMs. It's important to state here that cloud means everything. That is not just talking about AWS and Azure and Google and IBM. That is cloud providers as a whole. Because again, you know, we are seeing a good rise and increase in local service providers and cloud providers. So no surprises on that one. This one has always been an interesting one for me, and it's similar results to what we had in the last report that we did. So the reality gap, what is that? So we asked, how quickly could you recover your applications, and could you recover them in the timeframes that you think you're going to need them? And the overwhelming majority said 73% of them have a gap in how quickly they can recover applications. So they're backing it up, but they can't recover it quickly enough. And then the other reality gap is how often they make those backups or can afford to make those backups. When I say afford, that's not just in time, that's money as well, obviously. But what we're seeing from this is, great, we can all back up, but there's a big gap then on how quickly we can get that data back and how old or how useful that data is when you've got it back. So these are seen as two quite big challenges. So we need to improve how quickly we recover, and we need to improve the frequency of backups. And then again, this starts to talk to what Michael was raising earlier. And remember, this is pre-COVID figures. So the challenges that your team has in putting data management into operation, what are the main most impactful challenges and all challenges? And you can see here, it was already a lack of staff and a lack of budgets that was the most impactful. And that is only going to be amplified as we go, you know, as we emerge from post-COVID, as we know people are going to be laying off staff. And also, you know, one of the other key things is budgets may not be as available as they were pre-COVID, as people at the moment are not as willing to invest in new projects. So we still got a lot to do, but there's not going to be people, there's not going to be the budgets. And then this was again, no surprise here. When we ask people, what is the biggest challenge that you think you're going to face in 2020? The biggest threat that they saw to their business or biggest challenge is cyber threats. And again, this is something that we've seen accelerate during lockdown, but skill shortages, meeting changing customer needs, and then going down further down, economic uncertainty and regulatory implementation. And when I look at a lot of the services that our cloud providers are offering today, they start to meet a lot of these challenges that our customers know they're going to face. And, you know, we want to now focus a little bit on those cyber threats, particularly from ransomware. And I don't know how many of you managed to attend any of our Veeam sessions last week, but one of the key themes of one of those sessions was ransomware and how to recover from it. And it was you know, there's some very scary stories out there. And fortunately, we were in a position of having worked with a couple of those customers and helped them to recover from that. So, Michael, I'll hand it over to you. Just tell me when to click on the next slide on the builds, but we'll talk about ransomware in a little more detail.
Yeah, if we just build this one out, Graham, I don't want to teach people that what we already know. Yeah, this one, just that one all built out. The majority of us will already have encountered some sort of news or even been attacked by ransomware, because, and the reason why we wanted to bring this up, because that last slide that was saying about what is your most anticipated threat level for this year, and remember that this was pre the current situation, it was cyber threats, ransomware in our world, right? But then later on, we're going to see another set of figures that talks really about, well, what actually were the threats or the downtime, the causes of failure scenarios in 2019, and you'll see a very different number to that. Now, I'm not saying that ransomware shouldn't be top of the list, because I think it's very topical out there. We're very much talking about it at all angles of the industry. I think the important thing is this isn't new. It just comes at a bigger cost to downtime, to your data, to your business. So I think we need to just focus on what and how we recover that. And this is the reason why we bring this up, is that so it's applicable to everyone. It's not just applicable to the end user that you guys are offering a service to, but it's also applicable to you guys as service providers. It's very little point if you get attacked by ransomware, then likelihood is that your customer data is also going to be potentially infected if we're not doing the right prevention tasks to be able to ensure that data is in a good state. So it's very much, and it's also down to like the remote workers at home and an education piece, and people outside of our IT administration or IT industry, people that wouldn't necessarily be reading the topical news around IT, cyber threats, and etc. We need to keep that education wheel going. I think I've probably spent the last 2 years talking about ransomware, how it affects, what it does, how we can remediate from, or prevent, sorry, and then how do we remediate from an attack. And even more so as the numbers grow and the attack surfaces grow, then it's more about how do we get that data back as fast as possible. And the premise of this wasn't to give you a ransomware 101. It was more about that this is real stuff. People are clicking this in their emails on a daily basis. They're losing data because of it, or they're potentially costing their business money because of the failure scenario that comes with a malicious attack, such as ransomware. If we go to the next one, Graham. So there's 5 key points really, and the bottom 2 are the ones where obviously being a technologist from a backup company is where I'll focus. But I think it's key, and it doesn't matter in what, from an application point of view, from an infrastructure point of view. I think that keeping things up to date from a software perspective, operating system, vulnerability patches, those that administer Windows on a daily basis, you know that there's been hundreds of updates recently. And if you look and drill down into them, they're all around vulnerabilities, open, like doors that are open from a specific drivers or particular hardware, firmware updates that are out there. And that's how smart that the ransomware threats have become. They'll leverage those vulnerabilities to get inside of your network. It's not just about people downloading emails or clicking on links within their emails, although that's still a massive attack vector for those cyber criminals. And another key point, and this is really the first element where you guys could come in as service providers, is, well, how can I assist those companies, those end users who potentially aren't big enough for a security team, or maybe they did have a security team, but now those security consultants are being repositioned somewhere else because the need is somewhere else. And given the circumstances, that team being shrunk, etc. So that performing the ability to look into, right, where's our biggest threat? Where could this attack come in? Where could we be better from a permissions, from a user access point of view? Penetration testing, all of this stuff could be added service opportunities for service providers out there. Thirdly, we have around the training of staff on cybersecurity. So things like, I don't know about you guys, but over the last, I think I've been at home for 3 months, maybe even 4 now. I've lost track. It's been a lot of Mondays, but the amount of phishing attacks that I've had that have come into my personal inbox about streaming services and my payment updates not going through, and like I'm completely aware of those threats, but are your family and friends? And I think that's a key part of, not only should we as part of the IT industry and the service culture be training our end users and our customers, but we should probably take it upon ourselves to enable our friends and family that are not inside the IT sector as well, so that they're aware of these new attack surfaces and how these ransomware attacks are actually imposing into systems. Now, for the last two that I'm massively passionate about is, well, obviously I'm going to say, make sure there's a backup of all of your data or all of your important data on at least a daily basis. And the reason why we say that is not just for ransomware. Ransomware is obviously the topical point here, but ultimately we have a backup as an insurance policy. Let's hope we never have to use our insurance policy, but we have it just in case. And it goes back to what Graham said about the numbers is, well, how do we ensure that recovery time is not 70, I think it was 73%. How can we ensure that, well, every time I come to recover something, well, I actually want that to be 100%. What's the point in taking a backup if we can't recover what we want when we need it and to 100% successful rate? And then this is where, again, you guys come in from a service offering point of view is, well, let's back up all that information off to a secure and off-site location that is not accessible from the customer side. So we'd always say a customer should have a copy of their data, let's say right next to their production workloads, because that's going to give you the ultimate in fast recovery. But there's also the premise of being able to get that data off premises into a secure location. Traditionally before, this was around tape, and I'll get on to a bit more around tape because that's definitely not going away. And every single one of us on this call is having conversations with customers that either want to get away from tape or they have to keep using tape. And then everyone in between, where tape might be the cheapest possible medium type to get that data off site. And there's an offer in there that you guys can take advantage of as well to store that data. So if we go to the next one, Graham, please. So before we get to the long list of opportunities where, from a service point of view, where we can offer something out to our customers as a value add service, is we at Veeam, we talk about the 3-2-1 rule. And to be honest, I was saying about this prior to even coming to Veeam, and this goes to any backup methodology, any backup software they should be able to achieve, or everyone should be having this in their data protection or data management strategy, is making sure that we adhere to this 3-2-1 rule. So 3 copies of your data, which would be on 2 different media types, and one of them being off-site. So if we look at the production, we look at the off-site location that we mentioned, and then we look at that off-site copy as well within potentially a service provider data co-location. So then that air gap, how do we make sure that that's secure and off-site and not accessible? Well, this is where offline storage plays a huge part in that, because whilst it's air gapped, meaning it's not accessible from within the network, or it's completely powered off or segregated away from the network, there is no way anyone can modify any of that data, which means when we come to recover anything from it, it will be as we left it before it went offline. so this is where, again, the opportunity is to provide that additional service alongside the just the service-driven approach, is being able to offer that copy of that data in an air-gapped solution, which offers that 3-2-1 capability, the one of that 3-2-1.
It's interesting, Michael, just one point on that. And one of the things I saw last week, that one of the customers actually had what they termed an off-site solution, but it was still in one of their own locations, if you like, just a separate location, but was using the same credentials and the same network as the primary location. So although they felt they had an off-site backup, the ransomware attackers were still able to get access to what they thought was their air-gap solution, and bring, take that down as well. So again, that started to highlight the importance of taking it out. Almost, you must take it out to a third party of some sort.
Yeah, and also remember, like, so we're at the top when we started talking about ransomware. This is very much, as well as you being able to offer this as a service out to your customers, this is something that a best practice, if you will, that you should be running as well. A copy offline, air-gapped away of all of your client data as well, because then you add even more benefit to your customer if you were to be exposed and attacked, or even, and this comes down to, it's not just ransomware, right? This is failure scenarios that happen, and it could be infrastructure, it could be network outages, etc. But it also could be malicious activity within the business, and that business could be within the customer. So an air-gap solution, a mutable air-gap solution really helps there, as well as what it does against ransomware. But it also helps if you guys have someone inside your business, inside the service provider, who is malicious and wants to cause damage to that data. But then also think about accidental. Like I think maybe one of Graham's other slides will talk about the actual numbers from 2019, those outages, as I touched on briefly as well. Is one of them, it will be accidental deletion. So by providing an accidental deletion offline copy of that data, well, we can get you back up, or you can get them back up and running. You can get yourself back up and running by having that offline, immutable, or air-gapped way of being able to recover that data. So the first one I want to touch on, and I don't want to ever shy away from tape, because, as I say, it's the cheapest media by a long shot that's still available out there to all of us, from end users, but also to us in general from an IT perspective. Huge capacity, a bit of a pain. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of tape, but it's still very much an option for long-term retention and an off-site air-gap copy of that data. And I don't know if you know, but from a Veeam perspective, we introduced the ability for you guys as service providers to offer tape as a service. So bring it in through our backup as a service methodology, and then offload that into tape as a service for no additional points, if you will, on top of that. But it provides that extra step of being able to store that data that is, again, another service offering out to the customer. If we go next, Graham. Yeah, exactly. Good stuff. So then we've got the ability to, and I'll couple two here. So we have the concept of Veeam Cloud Connect, right, which is backup as a service. Okay, so Mr. Customer is going to send their copy of their data, image-based backups, into a data center, into a pool of storage that you're storing for them for X amount of retention, and they pay for the storage that they consume with those backups. Going one step further, more aligned to disaster recovery, we can actually replicate virtual machines from both VMware or Hyper-V into the service provider and offer more of a disaster recovery type scenario. And obviously with that, there's a few more steps that need to be taken. Like, how do we then connect into you as a service provider to consume these replicated failed over VMs? But again, it's another option to be able to leverage that offsite copy. And this is where we blend that backups and replicas to achieve that same offsite copy of the data. And I'll just go to that immutable backups. So another big take, and one of the last slides that I'll touch on later, is around immutable backups. So by integrating into object storage, or at least object storage that has the object lock API, that is what AWS S3 has, but also some on-premises object storage, and offering that out as a object storage as a service type offering, then you've got the ability to offer immutable storage, meaning it's not accessible, or sorry, it's not modify. You cannot modify an immutable backup. It is what it is, and it cannot be changed. It cannot be encrypted, but it also cannot be deleted or modified in any way. So even if there was a malicious user, ransomware, or an accidental deletion, you can't do any of those things to an immutable backup in object storage. And we have some on-premises solutions around this using Linux, XFS, and other file systems. But this one is the tried and tested, and really the easy button to achieve that. And then you've got, very similar to tape, I don't believe it's really taken off in anything more than SMB, is around rotating hard drives. Very similar to tape is that I'm going to put my tape library, I'm going to fill my tape library up, I'm then going to take them out on a daily or weekly, monthly basis, and I'm going to store them off-site in a vault away from my production environment and completely offline. Exactly the same concept for rotating hard drives. If they're not being used, then they're offline and they're moved to a safe location, a vault location, where you only really need to go to them if really you need to read them. Next, yeah.
So again, this was played quite nicely into what we're talking about today, which is how our market's going to move forward. We asked our customers what the defining aspects were of modern data management for the future, and what do they consider the most important aspects for that. And you can see the top of the sort of pile on this is the ability to do disaster recovery via a cloud service, the ability to move workloads from on-premise to cloud, ability to move workloads from one cloud to another, and the ability to automate recovery workflows and orchestration. So again, this is just pointing to the fact that the opportunity out there for all of us as cloud providers is to start offering these services in a differentiated way. But it's something where we've put a lot of our focus over the last couple of years in helping to design these solutions for you, because we're now seeing that this is exactly what our end users are going to be asking for. So not only are these the defining aspects of this, but they're in most cases the most important as well. And I think the one we're going to hear more about, and that's great, bearing in mind a couple of our recent announcements, is the ability to move workloads from one cloud to another. As the customers don't want to be locked into their own data center, they don't want to be locked into Amazon or Azure, and they need the cloud mobility to be able to recover those workloads to any other location. So I think this is a very important slide for us. So again, just some other key statistics before we get on to a bit about data reuse is, and we'll make these slides available to you afterwards. 95% of organizations have suffered unexpected outages. And the average time of an outage is around the 2-hour mark. And they've suffered at least one of those in the last 12 months, usually driven by 10% of the servers failing. Now, they would consider that 51% of their data is high priority versus normal, and they can actually start putting estimates of the cost of that against high priority data and normal. And remember what we said earlier, that the high priority data, there's a reality gap of how quickly we can recover that. So we know it's not quick enough. So based on this, we're saying everybody is going to have an outage, and that's going to last for around 2 hours. But each hour of downtime is going to cost them somewhere in the order of $130,000. So that's something everybody's going to get every year. Data reuse. and this is becoming, as you can see from this, more and more popular. And the fact that you're not just taking a backup of your data, but you're actually putting that to some form of reuse. And Michael, I'll let you talk to this one, as I know it's one of your pet projects.
Yeah, and like so, I think I made a joke saying I'm in backup or something earlier. But this is really where we believe that the focus will be going, not just in 2020. I think actually to touch on this, obviously, again, this was done before the whole COVID situation, but I think people are now looking at the technology that they have in-house to do more with that technology. And one of the things that we've had for many years is our Veeam data labs and the ability to put that data to work. And I think traditionally it used to be about backups used to be, we need to take a backup for that insurance policy and we need to store it somewhere. We're only ever going to use that insurance policy if we need to. But what we've definitely looked at least over the last 3, 4, 5 years, maybe even longer before I got here, was how can we give back that data to provide some sort of insight into the business, whether it's from a data mining point of view and understand what that data is that we're keeping, because again, we're humans and we love to hoard everything. So are we backing up the right data? Are we backing up multiple copies of that data? I think that's a common theme out there as well. And understanding a little bit more about the data that we're keeping. But we could go right to the other end of the scale and start to do some even more invasive testing against this data around security, pen testing, making sure that data is not already at threat because there's been something sat there for years in situ without any and then it's just waiting for that time lapse to come and start infecting all of your workloads. By being able to do that in a controlled, isolated environment, and also using the investment that you've already made in your backup storage is a huge plus for that. The other piece around, or how can I test against a Windows update or a vulnerability patch before rolling it out to production? Well, this offers that capability as well. And I think I would say we got a pretty fair number there at the bottom of, yes, we currently do this today. So think about that beginning of this year, we've asked that many people and they've said, oh yeah, predominantly we are doing something, or 50% are doing something along them lines. Then we get into, no, we're not going to do anything this year. I strongly believe, given the conversations that I've had, that I think you could easily swap that 35% with that 10 to 15% over, because I think now people are aware that things are tightening up, things are changing. I think they would definitely be looking at in the next 12 months to be able to do more with the data that they already have, rather than expending more. And without stealing, I know what Graham's going to talk about next around CapEx and OpEx, is without spending more CapEx on their existing spend, let's do what can we do with what we've already got. And I think that's the key to being able to drive that. And this is applicable to you guys as well. For those that provide IaaS backups, this is completely available to that as well. If you find that integration where you could put that data to work and integrate it into a third-party workflow and give some sort of classification of data, that's another service offering. And that's nothing back to Veeam at that point. You're just leveraging the Veeam data. The points are not the same there. I think that covers it, Graham.
Okay. Yeah, so we talked earlier about what were the causes of outages. So we saw that people saw the biggest threat was cyber attacks. But actually, the biggest cause over the past 2 years of outages has been what we know and love. It's been the infrastructure and the network, in particular, application software outage. We're all familiar with that. So cyber security events was further down, but that's seen as the biggest threat. When these figures show that actually what's happening is infrastructure and networks are failing more regularly than the cyber attacks. So again, we need to make sure we're protecting against those as well. And then further down, one thing Michael talked about earlier, accidental deletion, overwrite of data. Human errors tend to come at the bottom of this, but can be probably the most damaging as well.
I think there's a question there to the attendees on, like, is that a fair, I wouldn't probably say that it's a fair model of what you see within your service provider environment, but what about your customer environment? I think that there's still a strong opportunity around infrastructure, application, operating systems, storage, hardware is just below cybersecurity, but those four areas are still very much the biggest threats that we have, but they're not as exciting in the news, and they're not as exciting from an IT industry point of view. Is that a common thing across your customer base as well? And you can put your comments in the chat, or if you raise your hand, we can unmute you and you can tell us your story.
No, nobody brave enough yet. And I think that was one of the things I saw from Veeam on last week, particularly about the cybersecurity, but some of the other customers we had on. It was amazing that these people were brave enough to actually stand up in front of everybody and say, this is what happened to us last year. This is how it affected us, and this is how we recovered from it. So I definitely recommend you to go and look for those sessions. They are still online for you to use on demand. Again, this is another little summary, and we've touched on some of these things. Looking at app classification, I know we've all been through this. You know, what are our most important apps? What do we need to recover first? And you know, what is the timescale for recovering those? We're seeing all of that shrinking. We're seeing that all apps are moving to become critical or high priority. So there's less applications that are in use where we can just recover them as and when we're ready. And what we're seeing that also those high priority apps, the tolerance for downtime is less than an hour. And as we talked about earlier, most outages are for over 2 hours. 2/3, they're saying, are under an hour, but on average, we were seeing it was 117 minutes. Ransomware, of course, will change that. But, you know, so that gap is you've got to protect more of the apps, more of the time, and recover them faster. That's definitely what we're seeing. And it was greater than 50% was seeing this shrinkage in the importance gap. So everything is critical. And, you know, I think we've all seen that in our day-to-day lives. I think some of you might have seen several of us posted this. Backup will continue to be retained for a long time, and interest in BC, DR, and especially data reuse will rise. So everybody still needs to do it. We've seen the acceleration in the need for this. A lot of people over the last couple of months have had to test their business continuity in particular and have found it lacking, and have now that's top of their agenda to fix that because they've seen what an interruption can do to them. But it remains, and it's still one of the biggest drivers of people moving to the cloud. So everybody still needs this. And you know, to look at this a little further, the cloudy concepts, as they call this, there's some really interesting data points in this. So considering how your organization backs up its data today, how is it protected today? You can see today, 24% have got a cloud backup managed by a BAS provider. 25% self-manage using a cloud-based service, and 33% standard on-premise. But if you look at that in 2 years' time, look at what's happened to the cloud managed piece. It's grown massively. So managed by a BAS provider has risen by nearly 20% over the next 2 years. And the self-managed backup has gone up 9%. So less and less people are going to be doing this themselves. They are going to be moving to a cloud provider to take managed backup solutions. So this augurs really well for the whole of our industry, and it's why we should be focusing on these solutions. So again, what percentage of your data is ready for this? Again, it's rising over the next couple of years. And what do you consider in 2 years your organization's primary method of backup and DR? And 43% of that say that's going to go to a cloud provider. And that's up 20% again from today. And then it wouldn't be a Veeam presentation if we didn't mention Office 365. And again, you know, who is using this? Who's using it today? Remember, this is pre-COVID. This was pre-Teams going into everybody. So, you know, you now start to build that into this. That's going to give this a different dynamic, but I don't think the overall figures are going to change. In that when you look at the right-hand side and say, how does your organization back up M365? 68% are just using the built-in capabilities, which we know doesn't give you the retention, doesn't give you the granularity of restore. And, you know, now I think, was it last week we announced our latest version, Michael, that includes Teams backup as well and simpler authentication. So this is going to be a massive marketplace for us. And is in fact, looking at my data from the first 6 months of this year, is one of the fastest growing products that we have in the service provider program. So we've increased something like, I think 120% in the first quarter, the number of service providers offering solutions on this.
I'll go one step further there as well, Greg. So yeah, it was. So last week we announced version 5 of Office 365, which focuses on Teams and the ability to get granular restore into Teams. So obviously, and complete time, and this was on our roadmap, but think about how many people since the whole lockdown, the whole remote working situation have migrated to Teams, and that's where your day-to-day workloads, collaboration all sits, is in that Teams construct. So we already had the ability to protect mail, which came first, then SharePoint, then OneDrive for Business, and now Teams. Just to go back even further to that last slide, Graham, because I think you guys as service providers will already be very aware of this, is that people are trying to get out of or potentially trying to get out of the requirement to have to look after the underlying infrastructure, the whole networking, the whole VMware, the host, etc. They kind of want to offload that, and that's the trend that we're seeing, and that's really the trend that we're seeing not only towards the public clouds, but also from a service provider, an IaaS solution, and I'm sure your numbers all stack up exactly the same there. And it's really about offloading that responsibility to a service provider, whether that be an MSP or whether that be a hyperscaler or both, because a managed service provider should absolutely be looking at, well, how can we enable our customers to have exactly the same look and feel to what they do want to see and manage, regardless of where the workload resides. I think we're going to see an even stronger step forward from that traditional or you're going to see people move more into an IaaS type approach with a then look to PaaS and SaaS, and that's what we're really seeing from a strategic layer in the industry at the moment, and these numbers obviously validate what we were thinking as well.
So let's go to the summary. I think I'll build this one out, shall I? Will you, Michael?
Yeah. So just going into like strategic and where we believe there's opportunities from a service provider point of view, but also where I just think generally the industry is going a little bit. So within my role, I sit within product strategy. I keep product marketing honest with what they say, and I help, or hopefully help, product management design and build the best quality products that our customers are asking for. I also speak to service providers, customers, to provide that feedback wheel, and keep an eye on the industry as a technologist. That's really my job. The first one here, though, is really, I believe that over the last, let's say 1 year, maybe 18 months, that object storage has become that first-class citizen alongside NAS and SAN in terms of being able to store data. Now, store data because you can use it for your applications, you can use it for really anything, but obviously from our point of view, it's, well, how do we store backups into object storage? And I think this is where we are going to really embrace from a backup point of view. And we already have with the likes of some of our features, and I'll get onto them shortly about where and what that means to us. And moving those backups to is just one step. Is one step towards that cloud-based service offering, and potentially you've made that from a backup as a service or a DR as a service type offering. What object storage brings is that ability to offer that additional storage layer on top and allow you for that longer term retention, another service offering out there alongside all of those other existing offerings as well. And then also with the ability to do that the object lock or the immutability with, and this can be done, this isn't just limited to AWS S3. There's also other S3 compatible storage vendors that are out there. I'll name, like, so Cloudium being one and Zadara being another, and there's others working towards the certification for object storage that sits on premises. And why is that important? Because there'll be customers that absolutely want to roll their own object storage, and they want to buy their own hardware, and they want to keep the data in their business. And I'm sure some of you span the reseller arm as well as the cloud provider or the service provider. But then there'll also be people that just want to consume that as a service. And that's where the MSPs come in to be able to provide object storage as a service. And now, don't get me wrong, you could obviously leverage the Microsoft Azure Blob Storage. You can leverage AWS S3, IBM, etc. But then there's also those on-premises hardware solutions as well that you can roll your own. And that's where that immutable lock comes in. So where can you use this object storage? So one is from an image-based backup point of view, and something we call our capacity tier. This is our scale-out backup repository. So the land of the data hits the 714 30-day type retention on premises, so next to that customer, as I mentioned, and then it gets tiered into the capacity tier. There's two modes to get that data there. It's either copy mode or move mode. Either way, they land into object storage at that point. We also just announced the archive tier, which it enables us to use the deeper object storage in AWS, which is a V11 announcement last week at Veeam. The other area where, since V10, we brought in the capability of NAS Backup. NAS Backup has no functionality of being able to leverage Cloud Connect Backup today to store your NAS backups into a Cloud Connect service provider. However, we've definitely heard that, and that feedback is constantly going back into our product managers around that. But today, what can you do to achieve something for your customers that are already running that NAS backup? Well, NAS backup for a long-term retention can also tier older file versions to object storage. So customers can take advantage of that and being able to drip those older file versions into a capacity-based service that goes off to object storage. And then I'm pretty sure it was the back end of 2019 when we released the latest version of Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365. This gives us the ability to not only tier backups into object storage, but actually directly back up to object storage, meaning that the VBO server sits wherever you want, and it has a much smaller footprint because it's just an operating system with a very small Veeam piece of software on, and it can directly back up Office 365 and everything that I just mentioned off to object storage, and then obviously recover from that as well. But yeah, so they're if I was a service provider, I would be looking at how I could leverage object storage and promote that out to my end users or my customers to be able to provide another storage or an object storage as a service offering.
Great. I'm conscious of time. So anyway, let's move on. I put a few summary points here, and we're looking for feedback from you as well. So again, if you want to talk, just raise your hand and we'll unmute you. A few summary points from not just what we've seen from the Cloud Data Management report, but what we're seeing in general as well. We're seeing a repeat of the market conditions that we saw in 2000 and 2008/9, so the last two crashes. And during both of those, for those on the call that are old enough to remember them, you know, they both drove more business to service providers, or in the early noughties, they were called ASPs and are now just called cloud providers. So we've seen that the market conditions are right to start to build out our industry again. The lack of CapEx that's available is going to drive cloud models. People are not going to have the CapEx that they once had. So, they'll be looking for OpEx-based models, which is going to help us. And we've been helped in that this massive acceleration to digital transformation. I think I've seen this more acutely in some of the less mature regions across EMEA. So they've typically had lower cloud take-up and have been very in-house, on-premise based. And I think what they found was once they went into lockdown and had to send people home, they suddenly realized how far behind they were in digital transformation. And we've seen that accelerate even faster in some of those less mature countries. There's going to be redundancies. We know this. This is already starting to happen across different industries. You know, every day we're watching the news about how many redundancies are being made as the government schemes stop. And that's going to lead to staff and skill shortages, you know, within our end user customers. So that means that, you know, as service providers, as cloud providers, we've got to step in and fill those gaps. And cyber threats are increasing. And not only are they increasing, but the visibility of them is very much there in the press. And that means that there's opportunity for us to develop new revenue streams together, new service streams together, and to take those out to the market. So that was a very short summary of quite a few slides. And I say we apologize for all of the slides, but when we reviewed them, we thought that a lot of the data in there was going to be relevant to all of you as service providers and cloud providers.
It's time to wrap up, indeed.
Yep.
Graham, Michael, let me thank you very much for your time and for the very interesting presentation that you gave. Bet, thank you very much for facilitating this session.
My pleasure.
And you guys who attended, you will receive the recording, you will receive the slide also. And if you have questions that occur to you later on, or that occur to you when you listen to the video, or when you watch the slides, just don't hesitate to send a mail, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.